So I'm going to be thinking about accountability, and over the next couple of videos, I'm going to break this down into two parts, which is accountability in your relationships and accountability in your general life. Now, if we think about how we are accountable in our relationships, that's about how we show up, how we receive our partner or whoever it is that dynamic is with, and how we respond and how we help that dynamic to be as it is. And we are accountable for our own behaviour, and we are not accountable for other people's behaviour, but we also have to acknowledge that as part of that dynamic, we inform what goes on there. So whether it is your partner or your children or your family members or your friends, it's all the same thing. It's about understanding how your behaviour and your actions and your words influence how the other person responds and behaves towards you. Now, that doesn't mean that you are accountable for their behaviour, but it does mean that you are accountable for your behaviour. So we can think about this in terms with how we are willing to be treated, how we are willing to be spoken to, how we are willing to be behaved towards, and what we do in those moments to either keep that cycle going or to break it. So if we were to think about this in terms of, let's say, homeschooling, this is something that I've been battling with this week. And I found myself in a situation which doesn't happen very often, but I was getting incredibly frustrated with my 7-year-old because she wasn't doing a piece of homework that was so straightforward, but she had a mental block on it. And it wasn't that she wasn't able to do the work, it was that she didn't want to do the work. And I found myself in that moment getting quite stressed. And even though I was kind of holding a lid on it, I knew that I was starting to bubble up. And in my bubbling up, that then fueled her bubbling up. And that went on for about 5 minutes until we just kind of called time out on it and agreed to come back to it later. Now, that's a very simple example of how we feed each other. As I said, whoever that other person is, we feed that dynamic. And it's about understanding that behaviour in yourself, in ourselves, and recognising what needs to change. So for me in that moment, what needed to change was that I needed to accept that that piece of work wasn't going to get done. And that actually I was quite stressed because I had to start work in about 15 minutes. And so I was under pressure. I wasn't calm. I was trying to get her to do something to fit my timescales and not hers. And I understood in that moment what was going on. And it's situations that my husband and I have been in many a time, and situations which you will all respond to and resonate with, and understand how your behaviour impacts that. So that isn't to say that we are responsible, as I said, for other people's behaviour, but it's about understanding that dynamic. If you are having a tricky conversation, it's understanding at what point you need to break the cycle and step away if the other person isn't going to. And that doesn't mean necessarily kind of leaving the room, but it might be just recognizing what's bubbling up, what actual emotions are coming up, understanding that that isn't helpful to the conversation, and then stepping back from that and pulling back. And I think that applies to all relationships, totally across the board. And hopefully, if that makes sense to you, you will be able to start understanding those feelings within yourself and knowing when you need to step away or step back and change the ending of the story.